Friday, June 28th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. An unknown soldier is home from a battlefield in northern France after falling more than a century ago. Today and through this weekend, he'll be lying in state. Ahead of Memorial Day, we are asking, what does the unknown soldier mean to you? All right, we've got a full house here today on The Signal. Here with me in studio, we've got my CBC colleague, Heather Gillis. We've got Frank Sullivan, member of the Royal Canadian Legion and retired Chief Petty Officer First Class. Commander Shan Lewis Simpson and Gary Brown, official spokesperson for the Royal Canadian Legion, veteran, historian, and author. Thank you all for joining me. Heather, let's start with you. You've been covering this whole process, right?
I have.
What's that been like?
It's been a whirlwind, and I think you wanted to talk about the trip to France as well, and That was an absolute whirlwind for all of us. It was 3 days, 3 12-hour days, a 21-hour day on the way back when we were covering the repatriation of the soldier when he finally touched down back on Newfoundland soil for the first time in more than 100 years. And we were over there trying to gather for the documentary called Repatriating, Someone's Son Repatriating Newfoundland's Unknown Soldier, and Daily News. So it was a really busy trip, but it was a good trip as well, trying to take in these places that you hear about in the history books that we all learn about in school here in Newfoundland and Labrador, like Beaumont-Hamel and Goudaucourt and Montjuïc-Preux. Names I've heard of communities in France when you do your history studies in school, and then when you cover, Memorial Day and Remembrance Day. But to be there and take it all in on top of that while trying to work. And I have to say it was really special and memorable to be at Beaumont-Hamel and see the preserved battlefields. It was a really special place. And another aspect of it was all of the people that were on the trip. One big plane load of people from this province heading over to France, and the relationships we all got to form and to experience the repatriation event as a group as well was really special. And it's something that I think if you asked everybody who was on that trip, they will never forget it.
Often when folks talk about Beaumont-Hamel or other types of locations like that, right, there's a moment that people say that they like feeling something. And I know you had one when you were there. Can you tell me about it?
I had that moment on the morning of May 25th when the transfer ceremony was about to happen. We got to the site early to set up because we don't travel light. We come with a lot of camera gear and cables and technical requirements. So we were there early, myself and Terry Roberts and Ted Dillon, and they were all working to set up our camera gear. And the guy who was singing the Ode to Newfoundland, Jacob Neal, he's the supervisor of the guides at Beaumont-Hamel. So he started to sing the Ode to Newfoundland during the sound check. And as he started, when sun rays, da, 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 these birds just took flight. They took wing, and it raised the hair on my arms and gave me goosebumps. And I was standing there talking to another reporter, a colleague from NTV, Ben Cleary, and we both just looked at each other, and our eyes welled up because it felt like as soon as those birds heard the ode, they took flight, and it felt like the souls of Newfoundlanders killed there were lifting, and it was just so incredibly special. We didn't capture it on camera. It was one of those you have to be there moments, but it was just like completely spiritual. I can't explain it in any other term.
And for your documentary, I mean, it aired in Here and Now. It's available online. So just give folks a little bit of an insight to it and where they can find it.
Okay, so again, it's called Someone's Son, Repatriating Newfoundland's Unknown Soldier. And like any story, any good story, we start at the beginning. So we start with the former chaplain of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, Padre Nangle. And he wanted an unknown soldier repatriated. There's an article actually in the St. John's Daily Star from 1920. So I dug up that newspaper. Gary Brown actually helped me find that one. And he talks about how he wanted a soldier repatriated from France. He wanted a Navy destroyer to bring him back. He wanted the sarcophagus in a public place where people could go to pay respect. And he wanted the king to unveil this as well. And Princess Anne was supposed to come, but we all know now that she cannot due to an accident. So, none of this ever came to be until this year.
Yeah. So what year was it?
100 years later, Frank Sullivan started the work on this, the man right here.
So this is 1920 in the newspaper. And what year is this now again?
2024.
It's a bit of
more than 100
time
years.
later.
Yeah. So we start there. That's where we start. And we talk to Frank about all the work that he has done, and we talk to Gary about the history. So, the first part is setting it up. How did this come to be? What kind of hurdles did the Royal Canadian Legion have to overcome? Because at first, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission said no.
Yeah.
And how you folks got that no turned into a yes. And then we go on to talk to Dr. Sarah Lockyer. She's a forensic archaeologist. She helped exhume the unknown soldier. So how do you select someone to be an unknown soldier? So we go through that process. And then later we talk to the pallbearers, the young pallbearers, who are only some of them 19 and 20 years old. So they're young men, probably the same age as some of the people who went to war over 100 years ago. And we talked to them about some of their family connections. And then there's the CO of the regiment, Kyle Strong, Lieutenant Colonel Kyle Strong. And he has such a fascinating story. Not only is he the commanding officer of the regiment today, but he has a deep link to the regiment of the past, a great-grandfather. He has a special memento that his great-grandfather hand-stitched while recovering from injuries during the war. And he's also decorated for bravery himself.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan. So it's a fantastic story. And then, of course, there's the scene where the soldier is repatriated and, fighter jets piping in a special message to the airplane. It's just, I urge you to watch it. It'll put everything in context for Memorial Day.
I watched it last night. Excellent work on it. It was impactful. My folks were talking about it because they watched it on Here and Now. So great work on this, Mike.
Thank you.
I know you've got a lot of coverage. You've got a lot on your plate, so I'm going to let you go. But before I let you go, the question we're asking today for everyone: what does the unknown soldier mean to you?
So I don't have that family connection that so many people have to the First World War. Like, I've got relatives from the Newfoundland Highlands who went over, but they all worked in the forestry and they all came back. Yeah. So I'm not one of the people who will be standing there being like, is this my kin? Is this my relative? But it means so much to be there on this journey and to witness it all. I don't know if we're in the business of words, and I don't know if I have them right now. It's difficult to come up with them. So
I think that's a very normal thing.
Yeah, it's I have to process it first, I think, but it's really impactful. And if you're listening, I urge you to watch the documentary and the coverage of Memorial Day, because this is history.
Heather Gillis, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
CBC's Heather Gillis. We're going to put, so the lines are open, folks, right? That question we're asking, what does the unknown soldier mean to you? We're going to have a conversation through the course of this hour. And if you've got thoughts on what the unknown soldier means to you, call us, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. As I said in the beginning, joining me here, we've got Frank Sullivan, member of the Royal Canadian Legion, retired Chief Petty Officer First Class, Commander Shannon Lewis-Simpson, and Gary Brown, official spokesperson for the Royal Canadian Legion, veteran, historian, and author. Frank, we'll start with you. That same question I asked to Heather, and I know it's I could probably do a whole podcast talking to you for days about what the unknown soldier means to you because of your involvement with this, but let's start there.
Well, really, I was still in the military in Ottawa when Canada brought home the unknown soldier. And I was in the foyer of Parliament buildings, and the feelings you get are unbelievable. So in 2019, when Berkeley Lawrence started the process and with Gary Brown and the rest of us to restore the National War Memorial, I got the idea that why haven't we got an unknown soldier? So through research and through help from Gary and others, I found out that Padre Nangle had requested one, but it just disappeared somewhere. So doing a bit of research on it, I found that Australia had brought one home, these were Dominions during the First World War. So Australia brought one home in 1993, Canada in 2000, New Zealand in 2004, and South Africa in 2015. So we were the only Dominion left that didn't have one. So when I started my research, of course, I went to the Legion Dominion Command and asked, could I have the paperwork, a copy of the report? And when I read the report, and part of the report, there was a Dr. Serge Bernier, When the location of Vimy Ridge was selected to repatriate Canadians' unknown soldier, he stated that if we bring the remains from Vimy Ridge, there's a 100% chance he's not a Newfoundlander.
Yeah.
So I stopped, and you kind of think about that for a minute, and you say to yourself, he's right. We're not represented in Ottawa. So there's where it started. So with all the other research and that and doing the work, I drafted a letter and met with my MP, Ken MacDonald, in early October 2020 and gave him a copy of the letter, and he wrote a letter of support. And we didn't hear back for almost a year. And when we did, it was from Veterans Affairs, and they declined it. And we had a meeting for looking for money with for the refurbishment of the National War Memorial. And I went in with Gary and Berkeley Lawrence to meet with the Premier. And Berkeley told me I wasn't allowed to say anything until they had money approved for the restoration. So I didn't. So when that was over, he said, now Frank has a proposition. So he never, only for Premier Fiore, we wouldn't be where we are today. His eyes never left my face, never blinked, I don't think. And he said, you have my support. So I wrote him a letter requesting his support. He wrote a letter, and that was in 2021, in November. And in April 2022, it was approved. So there's how it all began and where we are today.
So then, not that long ago today, right? Just, was it an hour or two ago? What happened at Confed?
The remains were brought into the foyer of Confederation Building with the Premier, who, of course, as a representative of the people, is next of kin. And he's lying in state in the people's home. He's from some little cove, maybe St. John's, maybe some little cove, some little settlement that's not there anymore. But now he's back in the people's house, and he'll stay there until Monday morning. It's very, very moving, very emotional.
Yeah, no, it is. The impact of World War I on this place, and all the families, and all the stories, and then what someone like this can represent. Shannon, I want to go to you. What do you think about when it comes to the unknown soldier?
At first, I didn't know why we should. I questioned it. But then having heard what Frank had been saying and what needed to be done, we weren't part of Canada at that time. We were our own place. And Frank, you just mentioned then, where is this person from? A community that's probably not there anymore. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago now, we had a ceremony where Lean Seaman Leander Green was commemorated out around Sunnyside. I don't know if you were there.
Yes.
So you remember the hall.
Yep.
Christian Corbett created a bust of him, because he was decorated during the war by the king. He basically swam to a Norwegian ship on the 1st of January in the North Atlantic by himself with a rope to carry a lifeline to a stricken Norwegian vessel to save everyone on that vessel in the North Sea. So that's quite the feat of bravery. So he came home. He survived the war. He came home. He had a big family. And then he died on the same day that the Come by Chance oil refinery was opened in 1966 with a car accident, which is tragic. But when we gave the person that bust, like the family and everything, the family was there. The whole hall was nothing but his family. And at that moment, it struck me that every single person who did not come home from the war, those were the families that aren't here. So for me, the unknown represents a loss of potential, unknown potential in this place, unknown stories that could have happened in many communities around Newfoundland and Labrador which don't exist because all the men died and they didn't come home. So that is what it represents to me, is the loss of potential of this place.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this to you before as well, right? So my thinking around it's similar to that, because I look at my great-grandfather, Private Allen Tetford, right from Lawrencetown, goes over, gets shot in April of 1918, survives. Decades later, heart issue, X-ray, they find a bullet in his chest, right? So this is at the rooms now in the exhibit there, right? And like the story when I grew up was it was an inch from his heart. Now, I don't know if it was an inch or two, but that's not the point. The point is the inch or two really matters.
Yes.
And so it makes me think of the folks who are on the other end of that inch or two who didn't make it home. And then the folks who we don't know, where they fell and who they are necessarily, right? Gary Brown, what do you think?
Well, if I may, Shannon, I'll tell you something else that you mentioned about Leander Green. I had the pleasure of serving with his two sons in the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, both commissioned officers. And I went to see Kyle Strong, who is a cousin of mine also. The mess dinner is coming up. And I said, Kyle, because it's this time and Monday is so special, I said, Leander Green was forgotten about. How about inviting his son, who's still alive and so proud? He was a superintendent with the RNC, and so he'll be going to the mess dinner on that evening. But also, Shannon, you mentioned he was killed in a car accident. Well, excuse me. The car accident was Joey Smallwood invited him to come to the opening of Come By Chance Oil Refinery, representing the veterans of World War I. He was in the car with his family and a head-on collision, and him and I think his son and grandchildren were killed. So what an irony, and he was going to represent the if I may, Adam, is so important as a researcher, and we mentioned about our unknown soldier and what it means to all of us. And to me, I have to be, I'm really sensitive about that this soldier represents, there were some 1,700 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who lost their lives in World War I. And I'd just like to give you an idea of the different units they were from. The Royal Naval Reserve lost 180 approximately. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment, over 1,300. Of those, 272 were boy soldiers. And I spent years writing a book on the fallen boy soldiers. And to me, there was 114 with no known graves. So when that soldier came there this morning when I was on parade with Berkeley and Frank and all the others, I was wondering, this is one of the boy soldiers that I've read the stories from their moms and letters. So if I feel right up and got emotional about it. But then there was also, of course, the Newfoundland Mercantile Marine, who we don't often give credit for. They lost 109 members. The Royal Flying Service, which turned into the Royal Flying Corps after, but there were 13 Newfoundlanders who lost their lives. The Newfoundland Forestry Companies, who recently a wonderful book has been written by one of the relatives, they lost 11. There was 14 lost in the Canadian Expeditionary Force and another 29 with Allied Services. And we have two females that most people don't know about who lost their lives in World War I, Newfoundlanders, Ethel Dickinson and Bertha Bartlett, who were basically nursing assistants working with the voluntary aid detachments overseas and looking after our soldiers and servicemen, and they picked up the Spanish flu. Both died. One is buried in Wandsworth Hospital with, I think, is 14 other members of the regiment, and the other is here in St. John's and has a memorial down by the old Newfoundland Hotel. So at this time, we have to remember all of these because their families are listening. They're so proud of them, whether it was Forestry Corps or Navy or any of them. And it's so important on this day for the next 3 days that brave soldier who were there, we're remembering all the rest of them. So important.
You're listening to The Signal. Today we are asking what the unknown soldier means to you. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. Someone left us a message on the phone. It said, my dad was a member of the 166 for the Newfoundland Artillery. His name was William Moist. I know the stories that my dad told me of his comrades being killed. I'd like to thank the government for doing this. It's part of our history, a sad one, but it's history. We also have an email. It says, will the soldiers' medals be buried with him? And because the person's unknown, so if Frank?
Everything that came out of the ground when he was recovered is in the casket with him, everything. And as a piece of information, when they uncovered the remains, there was a patch there with NFLD. So they know for certain that this unknown warrior is a Newfoundlander. So he's one of ours.
Yeah, I was watching because it's both Heather's and Terry Roberts' documentaries on it, talking about the boots were there, right?
Yeah.
Because typically, what I was watching, and Shannon, you're an archaeologist, so you also know about this. The uniform will disappear after a couple of years, but the boots were still there, which is just, I don't know why that stood out to me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when we say lest we forget, right? So around Memorial Day, around Remembrance Day, what does that mean?
To me, we learned in school about war, and after being a military, ex-military with 42 years service, I have friends who unfortunately didn't make it out of Afghanistan and other accidents that happened in the Canadian forces. And back in 2019, when the war ended, there was a commitment made by all governments that we would never forget. And to me, the words "lest we forget" brings tears to my eyes, really, because here we are 110 years after 100 and whatever, the start of the First World War, and it's still as active and as alive today as it was back then. So we have kept their memory alive. That's what it means to me.
Shannon?
That's one part of remembrance.
Yep.
I think there's another part that we forget, and that is lest we forget what happens when we go to war.
Yep.
And I think that is not well remembered.
No.
I think that in many respects the world is more insecure a place now than it ever was. I think that people need to be cautious of this and perhaps be a bit more tolerant of each other, but also more wary of when intolerance leads to hate. And I think that is something that we are not well remembering right now.
I agree.
So for me, one part is remembering the personal sacrifice that was made, which we all understand is noble. But the act of war can be ignoble and lead to devastating consequences for everybody, everything, every community, as we see here, and what happened to Newfoundland post-World War I.
Yeah.
And it's happening other places now, during war and after. I don't know if we're well remembering how it is and how we should avoid war.
The consequences of war.
Correct. That's what always makes me a bit wary about these sorts of ceremonies. Like, are we really remembering what needs to be remembered?
Well, Gary, makes me think of, like you talked about your research, the books you've written, right? Like Boy Soldiers, the learning lessons. Give us a bit more history around towards the end of World War I and what it meant for Newfoundland coming out of it.
Well, excuse me, sorry about the wetting we got this morning, I think. But like I said, Newfoundland paid so much and lost so much. And another one I had failed to mention, but is really important, was that luckily there was no one killed, but there was a great nursing service of graduate nurses that went to overseas and also helped out during that time. And luckily enough, they didn't. And excuse me, the lest we forget is important, because now I think the soldiers' remains that are going to go down on that sacred place that Lieutenant Colonel Padre Nangle put there, from now on, I think there'll be a heightened interest. So it's fine to come out on July 1st, Memorial Day, and November 11th, and then it's forgotten about for the rest of the year, and then it gets close, and everyone remembers again. But this has to be done 365 days a year, and I think that the soldiers' remains in that sacred tomb will make people come out and sit down and think about it. So that's really important to the Royal Canadian Legion, and really, I guess it's important that as a proud member of the Legion, we got to give the Legion Command Newfoundland and Labrador credit, because the refurbishment and the bringing home of that soldier was because of the direct actions of the Royal Canadian Legion, and we're so proud of that. But like you were saying, Adam, Newfoundland had lost so much, and the families home here. And when Padre Nangle did that National War Memorial, he knew that 98% of the Newfoundlanders would never get to Europe to visit those graves. So it was I guess the stress and everything else, the remembering was far from these shores. And so what did the mothers and fathers and family had to do? Take this to their graves, especially the mother who carried these brave sons, could never get that closure as a funeral and stand up. But when we do that on Monday, all of those people who are related to the 800 or more who have known graves, this will help them close this family history and say, He's probably mine or ours, and now he's getting a proper burial with his country looking on.
It's quite to think of the thing to think about over 100 years later, and to say closure after that amount of time, right? And so, like, I think it does speak as well to the wounds that were suffered here and how long healing can take when it comes to something like this, Frank.
Yeah, back in 2004 or 1914, when the First World War started, the population of this place was around 250,000. And out of that 250,000 people, out of the 35% of eligible people went to war. So, I mean, that's a third of the population of this place. So we lost our country, basically, in that First World War.
Yeah.
It's devastating when you think, just imagine a family of 12 and you lose a third or a fourth. I mean, we lost our country. The First World War, to me, cost us a country.
Yeah. And like when you think of family meetings that don't happen because those families aren't, like, it just didn't continue on. There's a fisherman who I interviewed a few years back, right? So his name's Tim Ball, great guy. So I'm doing this interview. I'm looking on Instagram, and it was coming up to July 1st. So Tim posted a picture of his great-grandfather, and he's like remembering his great-grandfather. And I look at it, and I was like, wait, that's my great-grandfather. and like typical Newfoundland thing, right? Like, and I was so then like sent him a note like, hey,
awesome.
So then we trace back, and then we find out, yes, like like
That's
just
awesome.
the family lineage is let's go back to that, great-grandfather Tetford, right? And there's a whole crowd in Lawrenceston who I'm related. So let's go back to him and that bullet in his chest and the game of inches here, right?
Yeah.
So me and Tim, this conversation, if it's someone else the inch the other way, that doesn't happen. We're not there. He's not there.
Exactly.
Adam, I learned about that closure when writing my books and one on Padre Nangle, that when I do the book signings, people would come up and they'd explain to me and say, and they'd have pictures and say, this is my grandfather. And I can tell you, or great-grandfather or great-uncle, but it was just like if it was their father and they just died. If people think that this is far away in the minds, it's not. Of those many families and all conflicts and wars that the Newfoundlanders are involved in, this is immediate in their family. And I think this Fallen Boys or the repatriation will help them close those wounds and make them feel good about it. And it will also allow them now to go down when all the official ceremonies are over and everyone is gone and walk up on that memorial, stand by that tomb, or even sit on the steps and think and look back and reflect. And to those people, it's got to be amazing, and I'm so happy it's come about.
And to Commander Lewis Simpson's point, too, it's to look and think of cost, right? In today's world, right? The wars in the news every day. There's a lot to talk about what's going on. So to take a moment and look and think about that young man there and where we are now, and for lessons for where we are here. Here's a text that just came in. I'm currently sitting in my vehicle at the Confederation Building, waiting for the visitation to start. As a parent, I can't imagine losing a child. In my opinion, the return of the unknown soldier is bringing some closure to all families that were not able to have their loved one return. Thank you to everyone who has served and continues to serve for our country. Respectfully, Norma. If you would like to join the conversation, folks, today on The Signal, I'm Adam Walsh. We're asking what the unknown soldier means to you. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, like Norma did there, 709-327-8206. The Signal at cbc.ca for emails. Here with me in the studio, Commander Shannon Lewis Simpson, Gary Brown, official spokesperson for the Royal Canadian Legion, veteran and historian and author, and Frank Sullivan, member of the Royal Canadian Legion and retired Chief Petty Officer, First Class. So 1:30, doors open. Is it for the visitation for the lying estate?
Yeah, that's correct. Today at 1:30 till 7:30 p.m. tonight. Tomorrow, Saturday, from 11 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., and on June 30th, 8 a.m. to 9:30. Then there's a short break, in that, and then from 10:30 to 4:30 p.m. But people can go online and get it because I'm just rambling this off and they're trying to write it down. But they can go on the sites, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, tourism and sites and the social media. It's all up there to tell them. But we're so lucky also, Adam, from a research perspective. I was very lucky to have teamed up with Dr. John Fitzgerald, and in 2019 we had our National War Memorial named as a National Historic Site of Canada, the only war memorial in Canada to be named a National Historic Site. There are two over in France, Vimy and Beaumont-Hamel, but the Newfoundland is the only National Historic Site of Canada memorial, and we're very proud. And in 2016, Dr. Fitzgerald and I also put forward to the Historic Sites and Monuments Board that Colonel Nangle be a National Historic Person of Canada. So here's the Padre of our regiment and the person behind all of these remembrance activities. He is now, and both plaques are down on the memorial. I saw them last night. They're beautiful. So people will learn that story and how much of a community story that National War Memorial is, I can tell you.
How many times have you folks been on parade down there in front of the National War Memorial? I think the answer is a lot, I know.
Well, I retired in 2000, and I was in the Legion, so I'd say I've been at a war memorial most of my military career on Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
And we had one ceremony when I was at sea on July 1st, a short ceremony to remember the Newfoundlanders. I believe I was on the Athabascan, if I'm not correct, my memory serves me right. And
one of our old destroyers.
Yeah, and even just standing there on the War Memorial and thinking, I don't know who could actually stand there and look at the statues there and say, my God, what a loss. How much did we lose through some... And I was asked one time, I went in on a Remembrance Day to a school, and a little 6-year-old boy put up his hand, and I said, yes, can I answer? You got a question? He said, yes. Why is there war?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're standing there, you're looking at a class, and you're saying, now what?
How do you answer that question?
So I looked at him, and I thought for a minute, and I said, do you know what a bully is? And he said, yes, sir. Yeah. I said, well, that's why there's war. Yeah. And I explained it that way. That was the only thing that would come to my mind.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to control everybody else, so there's where we are. And we were talking about earlier about, and I was probably remiss in not mentioning that I have a great uncle's name on a memorial at Beaumont-Hamel who's known unto God. And I have a copy of the letter that they received. They had received a letter saying he was missing in action, and then they had a letter confirming he was dead. I have the copy of that letter from 1919. And every time you read it, it brings tears to your eyes. You know, you imagine a family. They didn't get mailed instantaneously.
No.
That had to come across the ocean on a ship. Mm-hmm. So it was probably months later when the family found out he was dead. Scary.
When you think of all the outports, the coves, the towns, right, in and around Newfoundland and Labrador, and like over 100 years ago, these things trying to get to folks. Yeah. Right? And it was even first just getting the information of who's here in the hospital or who's who's deceased on the field of battle and that process.
And that's the importance of making sure that we say it's the National War Memorial, Adam. It's not the St. John's Memorial. Yeah. It's national for all of Newfoundland and Labrador, like you said, everywhere, and we got to remember that. That's why we call it our National War Memorial.
Barry Fitzpatrick sent us a text. Private John Lambert comes to mind these last few days. A boy of 16 left St. John's and died on the battlefield at age 17. A true hero, like all others who fought so we can all live in peace. May they all rest in peace. So that's from Barry Fitzpatrick. But and again, like to the young, to boy soldiers, to folks who went over, lost their lives.
Well, I remember when I was writing the book Boy Soldier, and I used to ask my wife to read it. And we have 3 children. She'd only read a small amount. She said, I can't read anymore. It's too sad, the mother's letters. So it's very moving. Excuse me.
Go ahead, Jen.
No, I was just going to comment that we talk about these stories, and we talk about them as in the abstract because it happened so long ago, but they are personal to the families. But, you know, the scourge that is child soldiering still exists today.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is something, of course, that General Romeo Dallaire has spent his entire working life post-Rwanda working towards this. And Canada has championed the Vancouver Principles against children in armed conflict in the last few years. And that is what we're moving towards today, to help, you know, this issue, to ease this issue. Because once you have children and any people basically involved in conflict, but especially children, you can't escape the intergenerational trauma that causes. Mm-hmm. You know, like there's a huge amount, and I think that, you know, the children, because they are children who came back from war. Yeah. You know, what harms did they experience and continue to experience? Like Tommy Ricketts, for instance. You know, from all accounts, he had a successful life. We don't know what hidden injuries he had, and that's the thing, is that, you know, we talk about your grandfather with the hidden injury of the bullet. How many other hidden injuries existed in this place and other places
and
because
still
of
exists
conflict.
today.
Correct.
And still exists today.
So I think we need to take a pause now to just remember what the consequences of war. Not only the pride we have in people who, you know, will sacrifice everything for others, but the consequences of the act of sending people to war. I think that it's a good time to think about these things and how we avoid it.
And the evolution around the awareness on this, so just the fact we're having that this conversation now, right? So you go back to World War I, World War II, the Korean War, then you look at peacekeeping, Afghanistan, and finally today we're talking more on, you know, those injuries of PTSD, other things with the current serving folks or the folks who've just finished serving, which is all part of the discussion, right? And when we think of the unknown soldier, again, you're talking about meaning, symbolism for everything, what it represents. This is part of it too.
And you think of those 272 teenagers who lost their lives, their mothers, and 114 have no known graves. Children, teenagers that never came back. And where's the closure? But again, as I said, I think the repatriated hero that we're bringing home and putting there will help get that closure for families.
Yeah, I look at that and I watch, I'd say, at least every week to 10 days for a split second, Sing You Home by the Ennis Sisters and the Shalloway Choir. And that young man walking down the street, leaving to go in the army, and then knock on the door. And when the door opens and the mother falls back, and I have to turn it off. I can't. You know, it really brings it home what they had to go through, right? To me.
Give us the list of events for Monday, if you could.
Yeah,
Please.
It's important for those people who are listening. It's a busy day. I hear the weather is not supposed to be too good, but it's going ahead regardless.
Typical.
We have to keep on soldiering, as they say. At approximately 9 o'clock, invited guests are going to begin arriving at the National War Memorial. And 9:40, the Royal Canadian Legion marching contingent are going to leave Ayers Cove, come up onto Water Street, and head east on Water Street to the War Memorial. And at 9:55 p.m., the Legion Parade will arrive at the National War Memorial and take up their positions. And then after that, at 10 a.m., the Canadian Armed Forces funeral contingent will be leaving Beck's Cove, coming up onto Water Street, and they will also be heading east to the National War Memorial. And with every minute, there's going to be a salute as they walk by. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling people to come out, and you might not get close to the War Memorial, but you will come down on Water Street and let the children see the hearse and all the soldiers on parade as an honor guard. So that's really important. That's the timings that it's going to happen.
I'm going to be so curious to see the picture on Monday afterwards compared to the picture 100 years ago.
Exactly.
This is I'm really waiting for that because I don't know why it's something that really, like when I've looked at that picture from 100 years ago from everyone out at the National War Memorial, I'm just so curious to see what it looks like this time.
But there was a lot more space back then. If you really look at the picture, it wasn't closed off like it is now, right? So
this picture, Adam?
Yeah, thank you. That's the one.
Look at all the people on the roofs. That's what I like.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And of course, as you know, I don't know how it happened, but as a retired police officer, there'll be no one up on roofs or anything like that. Oh, probably, but it's a shrunk.
It's quite the folks on the roof. Like, yeah, Shannon, that is like it's the folks on the roof. The roofs there, and the buildings still look exactly the same, pretty much.
They
for that.
Yeah.
Right. The CBC's Terry Roberts just popped into the studio. How you doing?
Hello, Adam. Doing well.
I saw you on TV earlier this morning. Tell us what you're doing.
Well, it's been quite a morning.
Yeah.
Very powerful series of events this morning. A wet start to 4 days of historic remembrance events today, and I just struck again by the precision and composure of the bearer party that collect the casket, the modern-day members of the regiment, including my son, by the way, I don't mind saying, and taking the unknown soldier, their fallen comrade, into the foyer of Confederation Building today was a powerful scene, once again.
What's that like as a dad?
Oh, it gives me chills every time I see it. And there was one point they were halfway up the steps, and and I thought, 19 years old, and my boy was like 2 o'clock this morning. I had to drive him to bed because he was still shining his boots. So that's how proud he is to be a part of this. And they're all like, they are very, they all understand what it is they're doing because they've been doing a lot of reading. They've been talking about it so much. So it's, they're really proud to be what they know they're carrying a box on their shoulder and the human remains, but they understand that there's so much more than that. This is symbolic, a very important symbol that's going to be an important part of the fabric of this province for generations to come.
Heather Gillis was here at the start of the show. You're here now. Tell us about your documentary. I watched both last night. Excellent job for both of you. I learned so much from these documentaries. I think Heather mentioned, if folks are really looking to learn as things move into this weekend and for Memorial Day, these are both. There's a lot that you could learn, including bits on ballast in the ships coming over. Really interesting stuff. Tell us about it.
Just the inside story of how this happened to me 100 years ago. And just fascinating to know that we were a destitute province at that time. Yeah. We were so broke from paying for our role in the war, paying for a railway. All of a sudden, the fishery, the price of fish collapsed. We were destitute. And how did we raise almost $50,000 at that time is just beyond me. That tells you how motivated people were, especially Reverend Padre Thomas Nangle, to get this thing done. And for me, that's what stands out, is the effort to raise all that money and overcome. When people start working together in large crowds, there's going to be bickering, there's going to be differences of opinion. Yeah. That was all put aside because they had a very strong personality, very strong leader, a doer in Thomas Nangle who got stuff done. So that's what stands out for me.
Yeah. And one of the tips for me was just the negotiation for getting ships to go over and bring things over as ballast. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we were delivering cod all around the world. Yeah. And so Thomas Nangle comes up with the idea, how can we get all this granite here from Europe? And comes up with a great idea that, well, these ships are coming back. They need ballast. So they come up with a scheme to, I think it was maybe 6 shipments, Gary, all the granite and the statues came over on. Yep. And waived the tariffs that they would normally have to pay. And once again, this is the genius and the ingenuity and the drive of Thomas Nangle again, who got this kind of stuff done. And even at one point, the famous Basil Gatto. They had their fill of Basil Gatto, a famous sculptor from that era.
You fired him.
They fired him.
Yeah.
So things like that, 100 years ago, and a who's who of Newfoundland, of St. John's at the time, members of that committee. Names that are very familiar today. They were leading the charge to get all that done. And the politics of that era, just so interesting.
Yeah.
I'll shout out to Morgan MacDonald, because I know he and his team have been doing an amazing job in patining the sculptures and whatnot to restore them, and he's amazing. And so shout out to him. That's all I can say.
Yeah, because they've looked green for a long
Since
time
I've been alive,
now,
anyway.
right? A long time.
Yeah.
And having done that work done, what's the difference with the look and the color now?
Well, yeah, I did talk to Morgan about this, and I watched him down there for several days doing what he was doing, using heat to heat up the bronze, and then apply a new coating, a new patina, and then another coating over that. So now it's got that original metallic bronze look to it that would have been there 100 years ago when Field Marshal Haig
Yeah.
was there, stood at its salute, and as the tarp came down off that memorial, right? So it looks the same today as it did then, and it's even enhanced even more because the grounds are so nice down there now.
Yeah, they're matured, right? Yeah.
Over $6 million worth of work done down there,
And that.
and another $2.3 million to expropriate some land nearby. The federal government coming forward with $3.5 million. So, everybody opened their wallets to get this done, and it sure paid. It's you can see the result down there now.
And what's on the schedule for you, for work-wise, for the rest of today and the next few days?
Well, Canada is interested in this story.
Yeah.
Let me tell you right now. So
Yeah,
I've been
I saw
all
Heather
over.
Hiscox just this morning.
I've been on News Network. I think it's 4 times, and they want me another 2 times today. So Canada is really interested in this story. Yeah. So it's unique because people are starting to understand that there's not just one National War Memorial in Canada. There's 2, and ours opened 15 years before
15, yeah.
the one in Ottawa. So and again, I've been getting a lot of feedback. I'm not sure what your time is here, Adam. If I can tell you one little story.
Yes, Terry,
I
go
just
ahead.
had I won't use his name, but a guy who's a specialist in tool and die, can make things, and he called me and he said, "Is that soldier going to be decorated?"
Yeah.
That was his question today. And I don't know. Is there going to be, maybe someone here can answer that question. Will there be a medal for that soldier? Because he said, if not, I can make one over the weekend. I can make one, he said, that looks like the Order of Newfoundland for that casket.
I love the spirit of that.
So that's another example of how attached people are to this.
Yeah, it shows the feeling, right?
It does.
It's like, boy, I'll do it for him, which is such a typical Newfoundland thought on something. How does that work? Is there any is there anything around that at all? It would be different.
I've been so concentrating on the issue at hand of getting him home, and now he's home. So
Frank, you need another task.
No.
And of course, Shannon can talk about it. It's a historic site. It's a national historic site, and we have a working committee that's been together, a steering committee for 5 years, and we were very conscious. And John Fitzgerald and I, like I said, got that historic site designation. You just can't do what you want with a National Historic Site, so everything has to be really, really important and researched and things like that. But it's great to hear that people would think that way.
To hear that connection to it? Yeah, right?
Yeah, and it's telling them, but that is a historic site, and which is good. There's things, and Shannon knows, there's a long list of not-to-dos with a historic site.
Yeah. Getting back to the medal, that's an interesting story because generally you need to know who the person is, before you award any decorations or honors or anything like that. And in the case of someone dying, post-mortem, the family would do it. Yes. So I suppose if one was to take those 2 things, it would be the family who would be the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. So I guess the Premier got to put in a medal request there now, Frank. Yeah. And, for at least the 1914, 1918 campaign medal, if nothing else, and the death penny as well, because they had died. Mm-hmm. So those 2 things for sure, and otherwise, known only to God. I guess we can leave it at that.
Yep. Known unto God.
Yep.
Terry, before I let you go back to getting ready for your hits, you're on deck for Monday too, right?
Yes, so I'll be down at the War Memorial. There'll be a team of us. We're going to be broadcasting this live, of course, on News Network. Heather Hiscox will be hosting, and I'll be out in the crowd, I guess, talking to people, and talking to people like Jim Herder, who I just got off the phone with. Mm. Jim Herder lost 2 uncles in the First World War. His 2 uncles, another Herder, their cousin, died in the First World War. His aunt was a nurse in the First World War. His other uncle, Ralph Herder, made it home and was publisher at the Telegram and gave us the Herder Memorial Trophy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was wondering.
And probably another quick important thing, symbolically speaking, is there will be 800 forget-me-nots placed in that tomb by a member of the Royal Canadian Legion from Placentia, whose both parents were Second World War veterans, and he lost his great uncle at the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, Michael Walsh, and has no known grave. So there'll be 800 forget-me-nots going to represent those unknown. So again, so important.
So much meaning. Terry, thank you for this. I'll be watching you. I'll probably be down there Monday, and I'll get some of the coverage too.
Yeah, well, I'll be looking forward to seeing the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and other members of the military saluting the Ode to Newfoundland.
Yeah.
which
Took a while.
I'm told it took
It took a while.
a lot of convincing, but in one of his final orders as the Chief of Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre, authorized it. So we'll see. Ordinarily, a military member would only salute the national anthem and the royal anthem.
Yeah.
That's going to change on Monday for that
Oh, wow.
for one off, I guess,
Yeah.
on Monday.
Okay, thanks. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah, the Royal Canadian Legion went after it, and we said, now all Legion members, no matter when it is, salute the ode to Newfoundland.
Across
because
the
that was-
country.
yeah,
That's
right.
across the country.
Yeah, so it's time. And like Terry said, that's why we all have such big smiles on our faces. Because Frank will tell you, that's quite a story too about getting that happened. And
We could do a behind-the-scenes documentary on that at some point too.
No, I don't think so.
All right, we're getting down there. I've got a song that's appropriate to take us out here. But final thoughts as we leave today. Frank Sullivan, I'll go to you. That's okay. I think the breath says it.
Emotions get the better, yeah. And sorry, I just can't come up with anything.
Frank, that says it all, right? It really does. Gary Brown.
the only thing I can say is, from the Legion, we will remember them.
Yes.
Terry, final thought?
I got a final thought, and it's just three names. Frank Sullivan, Gary Brown, and Berkeley Lawrence deserve a lot of credit for what's happening this weekend and on Monday.
Commander Shannon Lewis Simpson.
So I'm thinking about service. I'm thinking about the service of these guys who did this. I'm thinking about the service of people who are remembering. And I'm thinking about the future and current service of those who make sure that that won't happen again. And that's including people not in uniform. That includes people working at Tim Hortons who are kind to you on a day. That includes yourself in the media, doing your job right. You know, all of us have a duty to remember through our service for others and putting service before self.
Well said. That's it for the show today, everyone. Thank you for listening to The Signal. We'll be back after Memorial Day weekend, after Canada Day weekend. We'll be back on Tuesday. Here's the Ennis Sisters to take us out.
Too soon to leave this earth. How could all your work be done? Ash to ash and dust to dust. Seemed to me you'd just begun. When grief invades my soul, there's comfort in a prayer I find. Though these candles honor you, they burn for those you left behind. I'll sing for you because I need to. Right now this is all I know. I'll sing so we will not forget you. I will sing you home. I will sing you home. Know that you will live on the lips of those who what it was you had to give, what it was we learned from you. This is our prayer for you, and maybe someday we will know. Que votre sacrifice se souviendra toujours. I'll sing for you because I need to. Right now this is all I know. I'll sing so we